are all united.
Please from the Netherlands and from wherever you are in the world, good afternoon, good evening, good night. And welcome to the session Fan the Flames, Regulating Competition in Digital Markets, which is organized by the Internet Society Youth Special Interest Group, the Youth Observatory. Today we're going to discuss the regulation of competition in digital markets. Anti-competitive practices are not a new issue, but as internet-related market boomed, the extent of such monopolistic practices changed and shifted to digital platforms. This led to a need for a sophisticated approach to regulating internet-related markets. This has led to different emerging regulations all over the world. For example, the Media Bargaining Code in Australia and the Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act of the European Union. This kind of regulation does not only impact large tech companies as they are intended to, but also small enterprises. This leads to both positive and negative impacts. Furthermore, the multi-stakeholder approach seems to be overlooked when regulation is established, while we notice more often in the field of internet governance that this approach is very useful when taking action. These are two main subjects that our speakers will discuss today. And a note for the attendees, just as Elliott already just sent in the chat, feel free to ask questions throughout the whole session in the Zoom chat. Me and my co-moderator, Elliott Mann, will keep an eye on the chat and make sure that these questions are passed on to our speakers during the discussion. So who are our speakers today? First of all, we have Veronica, who is there on site. Please give a little wave, Veronica. Hello.
Hello.
And she is a lawyer currently pursuing her PhD in competition law at Ca' Foscari University of Venice. Her research mainly focuses on digital monopolies and how the dominance of a few internet corporations distorts the competitive dynamics globally and curbs consumer rights. Veronica has been active in the internet governance ecosystem since 2019. In 2020, she was selected as the Internet Society IGF Youth Ambassador, and subsequently she was part of the 2021 cohorts of the UTIC and the Next Gen and ICANN programs. Currently, Veronica is co-founder and vice president for research at the Dear Government organization, a youth-led intervention which carries out the impact assessment of national and regional internet-related regulations and advocate for an open, trusted, and non-manipulable internet. And I would definitely recommend checking out that organization because it's doing amazing things. And I think we can expect much more amazing things of it in the future. Secondly, also on site, we have Thierry Nathanael Kopia, who is the young Burkinabe entrepreneur working in the digital and social sectors. He is currently the country director of the NGO Maxime Niansa IT Solution, whose main objective is to create opportunities for career development for young Africans through information and communication technologies. Since 2016, he has created an agency for the development of digital solutions and coaching in digital entrepreneurship called DigiClink. He is also the inventor of the S-Mask, a smart mask connected for self-health control, fighting COVID-19 and other similar viral contamination. Then third, we have Paola Galvez, who is a Peruvian attorney with more than 5 years of experience advising government entities, major technology companies, and civil society organizations in the drafting of public policies relating to emerging technologies, digital economy, privacy, and cybersecurity. She is currently a strategic advisor on digital regulation in the Digital Government Secretariat of the Presidency of the Council of Ministers of Peru, and leads the design of the National Digital Talent Strategy. Previously, she has been the regulatory and public affairs leader at Neobox and an attorney at Microsoft. Paola is a board member of the Internet Society Youth Observatory, former UN IGF Youth Ambassador, and Open Internet Leader 2020-2021. And last but definitely not least is Raashi Saxena, who is a telecommunication engineer by training based out of Bangalore, India. She is currently building HateBase, a global AI repository to assist universities and research organizations in moderating online conversations and using hate speech as a predictor for regional offline violence for the Sentinel project. Working with i4Policy, Raashi is supporting policymakers with practical guidance on designing inclusive policy co-creation processes for multi-stakeholder participation for AI policy. Raashi serves in a number of advisory roles, such as the Intimate Rights and Principles Dynamic Coalition and Mission Publique's We the Internet project. She has contributed to consulting projects for DCN, Gapminder Foundation, and the IO Foundation, and was highlighted as one of the 100 experts in Mozilla's 2020 Internet Health Report. So when I hear about these 4 wonderful speakers today, I have all the trust that it will be an absolutely amazing discussion. I'm very much looking forward to it. And today I will be working together with my great co-moderator, Elliott, and I think it will be a great session. So let's just get started to the discussion, where we're first going to discuss the first policy question: how do the ongoing regulations to address the market imbalance created by large tech companies impact small businesses? First of all, over to you, Veronica. Could you please tell us a bit about this?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Daphne. Actually, this policy question, it's one that I was, I thought a lot about this policy question, and I tried to give an answer, to shed a light on this policy question from the European perspective and from an academic approach. And in the European Union, the economic structure is predominantly made up of small and medium enterprises. So the Commission has recently seized the opportunity to start to undertake regulatory initiatives to try to, level out the competitiveness of small and medium enterprises in Europe, and has done it looking at the role that small enterprises and the relationship that those small enterprises have with the GAFAM, with the big tech corporation. And there are mainly two, there are a few regulations. We have looking at the small and medium enterprises from 2 perspectives. The one as small enterprises as a competitors, and as customers of the big tech corporation. In the first case, it happens. It happens rarely that those small corporations, especially startup, undertake the pathway toward tremendous innovation, especially in blockchain area. But it happened that many of those startups were substantially eaten by the big tech corporations, and without any assessment, any control by the anti-monopoly authorities. And this is because in order to assess whether or not the merger or the acquisition would end up being, to restrain the competitiveness in Europe, those startups should have a dimension, a substantial dimension, and usually this dimension is measured on annual turnover. But as you may know, those kind of startups usually have no turnover or don't reach the threshold, the legal threshold to notify the acquisition to the anti-monopoly authorities or the Commission if the merger, has an European dimension. But I want to share some data with you, data taken by a background notes published last year by the OECD on killers acquisitions and merger control. And that mentioned some reviews and reports by the Furman of 2019, The Economist, and from Lear. And it pointed out that over the time frame of 10 years, in 10 years, the GAFAM have made almost 400 acquisition and spending something like 31.6 billion US dollars. And a very few of them have been looked into by the the anti-monopoly authorities, and it's something that it's worrisome, especially if you think, as I already mentioned, that the European, the European economic market, the European economic structure is made up of small and medium enterprises, and that the Commission is pushing toward innovation and digitalization of small enterprises. But there have been proposals in this sense to adjust the criteria for the notification to the anti-monopoly agencies and authorities. But the problem is that with startups and small enterprises, there are other hurdles, because in assessing whether or not that acquisition could have an impact in the next 3, 4, or 5 years, it's quite difficult to find elements that allow the competition authority to effectively say that one merger, one acquisition could have an anti-competitive effect in the future. And because we also have to look at whether the product and service of that small startup would be successful in the future, whether it will go effectively, and there are other elements in consideration in this sense. And when it comes to small businesses as a competitor, usually, as a customers, small firms are most of the time also customers of big tech corporation, and they are what we call business users. Those they actually pay for the service that, I don't know if you ever heard of the indirect network effect. They actually pay for the service and for, I don't know, targeted advertising. And we get, as end users, we get free service because, we are supposed to be the target of those personalized services. And in this position, the small businesses are, are subject to an unbalanced bargaining power that tips in favor of the gatekeepers. And most of the time, they came up single-handedly with terms and conditions. They may favor themselves or deny access to their infrastructure and services, determine discriminatory condition, and this major bargaining power stem from they being monopolists in their own ecosystem. And this is the ecosystem is a concept that wasn't known in an antitrust or competition law, because we talk of relevant markets, but now we have to look at the ecosystem, so that, for example, in the operating system we have iOS and Android, but they do not communicate with each other, so they are not interoperable. And or if we look at the cloud computing, it's not possible for a business to switch from, I don't know, Amazon AWS to Microsoft Azure, for example, or to IBS, because there are no common protocol, because they do not follow the same standard, they do not speak the same languages. So those are basically, businesses are basically locked in one ecosystem without a chance to, go shift to another, competitor. And in this sense,
could you please try to wrap it up in the next 30 seconds so we can move on to the next speaker as well?
Okay, yes.
Great, thank you.
Yes, just to say that the Digital Market Act addressed this concern at imposing an ex-ante obligation. And yes, just this is my wrap up in this sense. So maybe regulations in Europe, it's moving toward, trying to support most businesses in this sense.
Great, thank you so much for the clear insights, and I really think that it becomes clear that a lot of work still needs to be done in Europe, even though they were saying that they are getting everything together so well. Now I'm very curious as to what the situation is in Africa. So I would like to pass over to Thierry to give his little speech on the ongoing regulations in Africa and how they affect small and medium-sized enterprises.
Okay, thank you for the floor. But I will give my appreciation in the world, not for Africa only, because it's general, it's the same kind of policies, it's the same kind of problem. Anti-competitive is same in everywhere. So we know that big internet companies are growing too powerful. These companies control large market shares and almost everything in their respective sectors. So in the increase of their power is in danger to small business on the internet. Their power allows them even to lay down market rules that are, of course, a problem, not good for survival of a small business and customers. The adoption of new legislative provisions or the modification of existing ones played an important role in this anti-competitive practice. Many countries are taking a proactive approach to finding solutions to competition concern in digital markets. To this end, they adopt new legislative provisions, modify existing ones, or clarify and adapt them. This phenomenon can be observed not only in the developing country, but also in the certain developing and emerging countries. For example, Germany, China, and Russian Federation have changed their competition laws to adapt them to a new challenge posed by digital markets. These amendment laws have given competition authority additional powers, such as the Federal Central Office of Germany, which is now empowered to intervene at an early stage. They have drawn up the list of potential anti-competitive practice. They have also extended or clarified the scope of the application of competition laws in digital markets. Japan and European Union have developed new legislation for online platforms. Japan has imposed new obligations, including on disclosure of information. In the European Union, digital markets law can be seen as extending or complementing the existing legal regime. It reports on the existence of guardian of markets, a platform, and prohibits some of their practices, such as giving a preferential treatment to their products and preventing users from installing pre-installed application or software, and provide for sanctions in the event of any infringement. State willingness to regulate online platform is detected not only by competition reason, but also by other reasons such as consumer protection, data protection, and digital industrial policy. In Japan, for example, the law to make digital platform operation more transparent and fair was drafted under the direction of executive branch in collaboration with the Fair Trading Commission, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, and the Ministry of the Interior and Communication. In Germany, where the public authority preferred to amend the law rather than adopt a new provisions, the amended law was drawn up by the Federal Ministry of Economy and Energy in the consultation with the Federal Office for Intent. In European Union, the development of and implementation of the law on digital markets is the responsibility not only for the European Commission Directorate General in charge of competition, but also the Directorate General Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship, Small and Medium-Sized Enterprise, and Communication Networks, Content and Technologies. Compare it with regulatory texts and guidelines, the amended laws grant more power to competition authority and more clearly differentiate between what business practices are acceptable and those which are not, thus offering a guarantee of legal certainty for business. However, changing the law takes time and requires competition authority to convince the government and legislative bodies of its necessity. In Germany, for example, the onus is on academia to conduct research and study to establish that the existing law is no longer relevant and therefore need to be changed. As for the new provision adopted, some of those developed as a precautionary measure for digital platform are still based on the self-regulation. In Japan, for example, the law to make digital platform operation more transparent and fairer require platform to carry out self-assessment rather than punishing certain business practices under the idea that its provision should be applied according to standards. In term on that, the platform would themselves be agree. That is my point of view regarding this question. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for your insight and especially having the worldwide view. I think that's very useful. Before we go on to the second policy question and start discussing that, I think it's a good moment to see if there are any questions. Elliott, do you want to take over?
Sure. Does anyone have any questions? I know if you're in Katowice, there's a microphone going around there. Otherwise, feel free to put your hand up in the Zoom room or put a message in chat as well. If not, I have a couple of questions. Veronica, you mentioned we're still speaking in terms of relevant market and other, old-fashioned competition law terms. Do you think that the fact that those terms that we traditionally use to talk about competition law, they don't apply to our new digital age? Do we need to do more than just amending our current competition laws? Do we need to take kind of a ground level approach to this entire issue?
Elliott, thanks for the question. Actually, it's what the European Union is doing, because they know they are amending competition law. They're actually, there has been an open consultation about the new competition tool, and they didn't came up with the proposal still, but it was due in the second half of 2020, and we don't have, the draft. So we do not know how, in which direction they took in this sense, but we have the Digital Market Act. The compromise draft was published, I think, 3 weeks ago, and they have certainly considered the fact that digital market, should we call it that way, digital ecosystem are different, have a different structure. So we are starting to acknowledge the fact that the competition law was conceived for traditional market. They have a certain structure, but that sometimes that in some sense don't always apply to the digital ecosystems because of technical barrier also and economic barriers. So yes, we can, there is a lot of discussions going on these days.
Do we have time for one more question? Do we?
Yeah, let's go for one more question and then go on to the second policy question.
So Nathan, I know you
there is
discussed...
a question here in the room.
Oh, fantastic. Let's go to that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Hi, Cory Doctorow from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Thank you for your remarks about the Digital Markets Act. I wanted to ask you to maybe contrast them with other regulations such as the Digital Services Act and the Copyright Directive, the Terror Directive, and so on, where we see that firms are really being required to be a certain size in order to function in Europe. In fact, they have to be as big as giant American tech companies in order to function in Europe. And how do you think we can resolve the tension between the desire to take these offshore companies that have created harms and make them behave themselves, and take these offshore companies that have created these harms and make them irrelevant?
Thank you. This is a question for me, isn't it?
Sure.
Yeah. I followed most the Digital Market Act, but I've read the Digital Services Act, and I know that in the Digital Services Act there is a discussion about prohibiting the targeted advertising. And yes, in this sense, there are some European parliamentarians. It's something that is particularly interested. I'm particularly interested in that aspect of contrast between the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, because some European parliamentarians have advanced this proposal to prohibit the targeted advertising. And I think that I want to be too harsh in this, but I think it's preposterous at this moment to forbid the kind of advertising, because you can talk of enhancing transparency, yes, but to basically remove the model, because digital markets or the digital economy is based on personalized and targeted services. So if you want to ban the targeted advertising, you are basically selling that you do not want to have that kind of economy or economy based on that, because we couldn't have free application or free services without someone paying for someone else, your business user, paying for personalized services and targeted advertising at this point, because it wouldn't be attractive as a model. I know I haven't answered your question, but yeah, this is what came to my mind in this moment.
Perfect, and I think there will definitely be more room for discussion on this topic during the Q&A part we will do at the end. But first we'll go on to the second policy question, and for that question we have Paola speaking. And this question entails, in the example of the side effects of the ongoing regulations on other businesses, what is the best model to predict the consequences of emerging regulations concerning competition on the internet? Paola, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daphne. Hello, everyone. And first of all, let me thank the session organizers for setting this up. Actually, it's great that we're gathering from very different regions, backgrounds as well. So this is an exciting and enriching conversation. Well, yes, as our colleagues mentioned, digital transformation presents unprecedented opportunities. However, I can see myself that it also brings considerable uncertainty on the evolution of this transformative era. And in this question, I am speaking as an advisor of the Peruvian government. And for the last months, I've seen how government needs a deeper understanding of the critical challenges that emerging technologies pose to the rule-making activity. First of all, digitalization blurs the usual delineation of markets and sectors, and it confuses the traditional distinction between consumers and producers, and I think it was previously mentioned. As this is the case with the rise of individual prosumers, this blurring of boundaries affect the scope of the regulator's mandate and activities. So the economic properties of digital business also challenge the standard cost-based regulatory models, as price formation in the digital economy obeys different rules. And most of the time, local entrepreneurs do not have the financial back to comply with new regulatory mandates. I can see that in Peru. We have many startups, for instance, but they complain because they say that when this new bill will come into force, they will not be able to comply with it. And it will obligate them to either finish their operations in Peru and go to another country that has more flexible regulations, or just sell the startups to a bigger company. And that is not what we want at all. We want really an innovation ecosystem in Peru that gets bigger, sorry. Another important challenge that digitalization brings to governments when regulating is the difficulties of regulatory enforcement, as it questions the traditional notion of liability. In particular, it makes it more difficult to apportion and attribute responsibility for damage caused by the use of technology to end users, or the difficulty of attributing liability to the vendor, or I don't know, the equipment manufacturer. Also, when AI or another technology is involved, for instance, it's difficult for public officers to enforce this. Moreover, digitalization drastically increases the intensity of cross-border flows, which I see it has a lot of benefits, and it gives businesses global reach while being able to locate various stages of their production processes or service centers across different countries. But this feature enables companies to avoid compliance when it comes to their physical presence and their policy for data protection or other regulated areas, for example. Therefore, there is a mismatch between the transboundary nature of digitalization and the fragmentation of regulatory frameworks across jurisdictions. To tackle this challenge, the harmonization of regulatory frameworks is a good option. I wouldn't say globally, because we have different circumstances, but I would say at least regional. For instance, in Latin America, governments were trying to have these conversations to bring a digital agenda and try to harmonize this. In this pandemic situation bring to the agenda a lot of challenges, and now it's one of the main topics of our regional discussions. And going back to your question, Daphne, I haven't found the best model yet. But first of all, governments should not rush into regulation, as there is a real risk of getting it wrong, and particularly affect small and medium businesses. In some cases, a regulatory approach may not even be the best course of action. What we do at the Secretariat of Digital Transformation in Peru is to reflect on the public policy problem that we aim to solve. Question and test the approaches that may help achieve the policy objectives, because our main goal is to promote digital innovation while preserving digital rights and mitigating the risks. And given the dynamics of the digital transformation, regulatory solutions must be flexible enough to let innovation be developed. Yesterday, I heard this term in a session, future-proof regulations, and actually I really like it because it summarizes very well what we're looking for in the Peruvian government. Technologies go faster than law, and it will happen certainly in the future. And we don't want to regulate each new technology. Therefore, constant government monitoring is needed, as well as regulatory impact assessment, and also carry out regular post-implementation reviews. So that would be one idea I have, not really the best model yet, but I think this is my point of view, and happy to discuss this further next. Thank you, Daphne, and everyone for your attention.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think I was thinking about this question as well, and I think it's very difficult to find a model, but I think what you propose is a great first step. I think over to Elliott to see if there's maybe one question before we go to the next policy question.
Is there any questions in the room? I think let's just move on to the next question and we can have more time at the end.
Perfect. I think that's a good idea. And I think we also have some nice overlap with the second policy question, the third policy question, apologies, where the question is, what role can the multi-stakeholder approach play in the creation of effective regulations on competition, and should this possibly be revised or modified? First of all, we will go to Paola because she unfortunately can't stay until the end of the session. So Paola, take the floor.
Thank you, Daphne. And I don't want to monopolize the discussion, so I will be brief. But yeah, what we just mentioned has given new impetus to the significance of a multi-stakeholder model of internet governance. And in Peru, we are firm believers that the technical management and governance of the internet should not be only under government control. In fact, it is a priority for the Peruvian government to keep supporting and strengthening capacity for all the stakeholders, including industry, academia, civil society, the youth also. So what has happened, and I'm going to share our experience, that we have approved urgency decree number 006, which creates the Digital Transformation National System. It is a functional system of the executive branch, and this norm, this law, gives an equal level to each stakeholder, and it allows for community-based policymaking. This law recognizes that all the stakeholders have a valuable contribution to make to internet governance discussions and decisions. And it is a proven model for responding to these complex policy and technical challenges. What else? We have also the Laboratory of Digital Transformation. It's like an innovation lab of the government. And we have a group of researchers that constantly go and speak with the citizens, because they are the ones who are in pain or that they need their rights to be preserved. Before the pandemic, researchers used to travel and go to the rural areas, because that is when we have more connectivity gap, a digital talent gap. So is firsthand listened to what they have to say. Now that we are under pandemic circumstances, all the surveys are held online, which I hope we can resume our face-to-face service. But for us, it's fundamental to listen to the citizens and to discuss this. Also, the Peruvian general government policy for the period 2021 to 2026 has included as an axis the digital transformation of the country with equity. It is the first time that this topic has been added to a general government policy. And in my opinion, this is a relevant step to give multi-stakeholder discussions on digital policy the relevance that they need. For instance, the artificial intelligence national strategy and the digital talent strategy that I am co-designing, we are doing it under a committee, multi-stakeholder committee that was formed I think 3 months ago, and we have bi-weekly calls, and in that session, we listen to what the academia, the Ministry of Education, also NGOs has to say around these topics. And well, Peru is a strong supporter of an open, free, safe and secure internet. And we as a country are advocating for policy settings that support this position. So yes, if I have to say a brief response, multi-stakeholder efforts are the best when trying to regulate these emerging technologies. Thank you so much, and looking forward to listen to the other colleagues.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And it's so nice to hear that in Peru they already actively do this, and I hope that many other countries take an example for this as well if they're not doing so yet. Then I would like to go to Raashi to share her point of view on this question. Raashi, the floor is yours.
Daphne. Thanks, Daphne. I apologize. I might not be able to switch on my camera, but my connection's a bit patchy. But yeah, I'm happy to kind of share slides and we perhaps talk a little bit about the work that I've been doing with the Innovation for Policy Foundation in UN, where we're looking at case studies and use cases across the world on what are the effective multi-stakeholder approaches to AI policy development. So maybe I could talk a little bit about how I think something that we've seen is that there's just a general misconception around what AI can do and how AI can actually be effective. So we've realized that most of the AI policies, if they really have to kind of affect all stakeholders in it being related to jobs or any other aspect, you really do need to have a lot of literacy and kind of, I would say, building capacity initiatives across the sector. So maybe I'll go on to the next slide, please. Daphne, maybe you can share the next slide.
Yes, yeah, I'm trying to do so. I'm having a bit of a fight with it.
Yeah,
apologies.
You've got it now.
Perfect. No worries. Can it be seen? I'm unfortunately unable to see all of them, but we've also seen that multi-stakeholder approaches, when done really well, of course, have to come in and initiated by the government. They also ensure a consensus that you have to kind of reach through on why the final outcome is widely supported. So, have a good feedback mechanism loop and be in touch with the community rather than having one-off events. And also, like I said, participatory processes raise a lot of awareness and build capacity. One of the great examples perhaps in India is that post the India strategy was drafted by a government think tank called Niti Aayog. But then once the drafting was done, it had a very multi-sectoral approach. We have a non-profit foundation that's kind of furthering the development of the health policy, and we have a for-profit entity that's looking where it started an initiative called AI for All, which is basically how do we incorporate AI education in schools and universities. Daphne, next slide, please, or maybe someone else could share them. I lost track of the slides.
I'll try to share them in a different way because my laptop decided that it didn't want to work anymore. Give me 1 second.
No worries.
Sorry for this.
Yeah, I think that's okay. I can go on. So yeah, I think basically the multi-sectoral approach was really nice because all of the sectors could really play in with their strengths. Because obviously in this case, a lot of government entities don't have an idea of what the implications of AI are, and you really need technologists and people who really understand the issue. So it's also good to kind of borrow ideas, and no country can really work on silos. I don't think a lot of countries can do that. So when we wanted to understand and build this handbook to guide policymakers across the world, we did take expertise from experts from across the world, and we also that was one where we wanted to understand what are the human rights implications of AI. And in the second aspect, we also wanted to take interesting case studies from across the world. So we spoke to Brazil, we spoke to Chile, which is again great example of a bottom-up approach process, where for the first time they actually had citizens that participated and really enjoyed the process of learning throughout, along with a lot of civil society actors. They recently published their AI strategy sometime, I think, last week of October. So yeah, our idea was to kind of provide evidence-based guidance on how you can have more policy co-creation efforts, and also look at kind of, how do we impose a human rights aspect of things, because yeah, there's just a lot of hysteria around how AI will take away your jobs and a lot of other myths that we try to debust. Maybe you can move on to the next slide. Yeah, these are some of the testimonies that we had from experts across the world. So it says inclusion is not just the participation, but it's engagement, representation, and empowerment of disabled and underrepresented groups and population. And this is important for anyone who wants to, and especially for private sector who's looking at adoption, which is far and wide. So one great example, I would say, which is the Common Voices project that looks at voice recognition, and they're doing some great work in Africa. The next slide, please. Yeah, so also AI is also very input driven. So you need to make sure that you train your data sets in languages outside English, because you have a lot of populations that don't speak in English and operate in different dialects across the world, and how it's important to kind of consider in AI policy discussions to avoid biases, because I know that we're all human beings that have our own sets of biases, but kind of having more data sets could really inform and train your AI technology to be as accurate as possible. Next slide. But yeah, some of the downsides of multi-stakeholder approach is that it is difficult to translate it to theory, and practice can be really hard because it requires effort, time, and resources, and more importantly, a high budget. Because you're really looking at enabling the process from different actors, which takes a lot of time and strategy. And as we said, that countries really need to be more open to this process, because it's hard to convince those who are in charge and ensure a very inclusive process. So that's an aspect that where we say, so it really depends on who's kind of navigating through this. And maybe I'll end with talking about a few lessons that we've learned in the process and the conversations that we've had. Next slide, please. So some of the lessons learned, we say that assign clear responsibilities to all stakeholders, making sure that you're building capacity and awareness, especially among civil society, especially the ones who want to use AI technology to kind of solve problems in their line of work. Also, of course, establishing a diverse and inclusive task force and expert group preferably from across the world, so that you can kind of weigh in and also learn new perspectives. Next slide, please. Also, when you're looking at a deliberative process, you're also trying to reach consensus, so it also requires discussions among different stakeholders. It is also important for you to make sure that you do have disadvantaged groups, and always, rather than a lot of issues that we do see is that a lot of countries like picking up policies that they find interesting, but not localizing them with existing examples. And I think that's very important to try and test everything. And of course, if you're looking at it from a long-term aspect, it's also important to have community champions to effectively communicate, and in many cases even translate translate whatever policies that we're trying to come up with. Next slide, please. Also determining a time and horizon strategy. India has a 5-year strategy. Chile finished their strategy in 2 years and will take perhaps another 8 years for it to kind of move into legislation. I think that's more about it, and I'm happy to answer any questions that might be taken up. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much. And I think this is a very interesting insight to see how I4 policy is working with this. And I think during Q&A, we'll definitely discuss this even further. But before we go to the Q&A part, we will first go to Veronica. Please share your insights.
Thanks, Daphne. I just wanted to complement to what Raashi and Paola already said. And Raashi rightly mentioned the multi-stakeholder approach has been, undertaken in India, and the multi-stakeholder approach of the UNESCO recommendations on AI, on ethics of AI. And my thought is at this point that it's easy to reach to convince governments to do the multi-stakeholder approach when it comes to ethics, but it's a bit more difficult to convince them when it comes to complex regulation like that of the digital market and competition, because the main argument against multi-stakeholderism is that first, not all the stakeholders are interested in the multi-stakeholder in the policy making when it comes to digital market and competition. And the second argument that they raised is that not all the stakeholders, for example, civil society, has the right expertise to cope with the complexity of digital markets and competition. Both have been proven wrong. In the first case, the open consultation of both the new competition tools and the Digital Market Act have been, we experienced in the European Union a great participation, a great response by civil society, by the private sector. And I have the percentage here, and I have to say that, almost more than a half, and regarding the new competition tool, more than a half of the responses to the inception impact assessment came from a private sector. Then we have non-governmental organization, and there were a small percentage of individual European citizens that actually send their response to the inception impact assessment, while the academics percentage of participation is a bit disappointing, because I see here like 8% of persons representing academia participated to the open consultation about a new competition tool. And we have also other, other percentage other data regarding the participation of stakeholders to the open consultation of the Digital Markets Act. And 66% of European citizens participated to the open consultation. So the first argument, it's been proven wrong. In the second case, we have also the experience of the Digital Market Act, the compromise draft. In the compromise draft, the European Parliament has proposed the establishment of a high-level group of digital regulators that gathers together representatives from the Commission and the national authorities, data protection authorities, telecommunication authorities, competition authorities, all from public bodies, no one from the other stakeholders. I think that this has been a missed chance to actually get the other stakeholder involved into the regulatory or policy making process, because this group, a high-level group, would carry out advisory task to the Commission pertaining to the activities falling within the scope of the Digital Markets Act. That would have been a good choice to open up the participation to the other stakeholders at this point. And yes, last consideration from my part is that, as I mentioned before, when Elliott asked me a question, the antitrust law was designed for traditional markets. Now we live in a digital world. We have this mantra in this IGF, and it's high time we recognize or acknowledge the fact that other stakeholders, when it comes to the regulation of internet-related regulations or internet-related issues, at this point we have to bring multi-stakeholder aims forward.
Great, thank you so much for your insights. I think these were all great contributions that made our policy question much clearer, but I am sure that there are still many questions as well. So Elliott, over to you.
See, Nathan's got his hand up. Nathan, go ahead.
There is Nathan here that wants the...
Yeah.
Okay. I agree with you about the opening of or to the participation of other stakeholders like private sectors, companies, but is to see that if you want to add this kind of stakeholders, you have to consider small business, because if the big companies took part at this I don't know how took part at this kind of platforms, the problem will be stay the same because they are more powerful. So we have to permit at the small business to have a big, I would say, to have her word to say, to listen to small business, because there is a small business which suffer by this anti-competitive practice. So we have to listen to these small businesses. We can give them the floor, but we have to consider what they say. I don't know if you understand.
Yeah. Can I answer to just a quick reply to Nathan? In the EU, the Digital Market Act sets a top-down compliance on gatekeepers, and compliance as costs that will pass on to their customers. There are small businesses. So I think that the private sector, yes, or at least their customers, the small businesses, should also be taken into consideration when it comes to co-regulation at this point.
Sure, that's great. Thanks for those contributions. Yes, I think we have a hand up in the crowd.
Thank you. Okay. we sorted out the mic. Hi, I'm Vittorio Bertola. I work for a German open source software company, a mid-sized one, that's called Open Exchange. So actually, I did want to enter into this discussion and actually provide a private sector perspective from European SMEs. Actually, we've been busy building actually a coalition, which is called the Coalition for Competitive Digital Markets, which is gathering over 50 companies, even if we just exist for, since a couple of months, from 16 countries, and almost all of them are SMEs. And we are actually trying to participate in the European regulatory discussion. So I actually wanted to say, first of all, that Nathan's comment was spot on. Actually, you do have this issue that from one point of view, you would like to get more multi-stakeholder participation processes. I mean, like the IGF. I've been involved in this for like 20 years. I was one of the people that actually invented the IGF and promoted the idea of multi-stakeholder processes. So I'm all in favor of them. But the practical experience shows that over the internet especially, many of the multi-stakeholder processes, be them conferences, be them, for example, the standardization bodies, are dominated by the same big tech companies that dominate the markets. So if you go and try to participate into these processes, maybe if you go to the global standardization processes like the ITF or the W3C, there's a different set of big companies than the ones you find in European standardization venues like ETSI. But at the same time, these are typical places where big companies have the money and energies to send a lot of people, while small companies are very few. And they have a hard time because they have very few people, and maybe they follow it, maybe they're subscribed to mailing lists, maybe they even go to the meetings and sit in the last row of seats, but they never have the time to take leadership positions, to do a lot of work. So in the end, the result is deeply shaped by the biggest companies. And so we have to be very careful that whatever multi-stakeholder consultation processes or even deliberation processes are introduced around regulation are not so easy to capture by the biggest people, the people that can throw more money and more resources to them. And also, more in general, I think that for European SMEs, it's very important to finally start to see some regulation of digital markets. So we've been asking for this for quite some time. Because the imbalance in European digital markets is evident. And the fact that we now have network effects so that it's very hard to compete, even if you have good products, sometimes better products than the dominant ones, it's clear. So in the end, I would say that especially the Digital Markets Act does a good job in distinguishing between the big gatekeeper companies, which have the obligations, and the small business companies, which are protected. I mean, they are given opportunities for competition simply by the fact that, for example, the gatekeepers should be forced to open up their services to interoperability. And they are also given guarantees if they are customers or users of these big platforms, which is also very important because the imbalance of power in the business negotiation between Amazon and an Amazon supplier or a third party that wants to sell stuff on Amazon is clear, and it is huge. And so there is the need to protect these people with even the business terms, and the terms and conditions of these services should be, if not fully regulated, at least should have oversight by public regulators, because it's just too easy for the big platform to impose both to business users and to end users their own conditions, which often are not balanced and not fair. At the same time, I do recognize, I mean, it's true, as we were saying before, that there are other cases of regulation in which the lawmaker is thinking of obligations that are only possible for the very big companies, but are not really possible for the SMEs. So if you have to take down content in 12 hours, if you're a very big company, you can have people that spend all their time in interns in front of a computer and moderate content. If you're a 3-people company with a new community of social media, it's basically impossible to do that. So it's going to kill your business. So we have to be very careful that, to tell and explain to lawmakers that they have to make differences in these things. We have been sometimes successful. I mean, the copyright directive recent experience has been, good and bad. There are some really bad things about upload filters, but for example, we could get an exemption for open source code sharing platforms from the upload filters. This was obtained only because there was some active participation by the directly affected companies. And so we need to, maybe what we should do is also to mobilize more all the small business companies around the world and to participate in these lawmaking processes. So sorry if in the end this was more of a comment than a question, but maybe there's some reflection that the people want to make on this.
Thank you. I think that was really valuable. Anyone wish to comment on that?
Maybe also good to link it maybe with another question, because we're talking about in the great intervention, we were talking about, well, it's actually really difficult for small and medium-sized enterprises to like kind of stand up and compete with the bigger companies, especially when it comes to policy making processes and to have your say and your input in that. And it was also shortly touched upon that it might actually need to be a worldwide effort to stand up against these big global companies. And I think maybe a question we can link to that is, do we think that there is a need for worldwide regulations or standards, especially because there are companies with a global reach, because we have cross-border data transfers. So we see that the market is not regional anymore, but it's a global thing. So do we think there is a need for worldwide regulation? And maybe Nathan or Raashi would like to say something about that.
I'm not, this is Raashi to said, I'm not sure if we first need to have, I think, a commonly accepted definition of what we perhaps define regulation. It depends on which emerging technology you are specifically talking about. So I think we lack a commonly accepted, or rather I would say taxonomies. So I'm not sure if it's going to work, because you have some countries that have different legislation, and some countries, like I think in India, I do see that there is a huge enforcement issue. So I'm not sure if the balance is going to be there. It needs to be more country specific. But yeah, there still might be room for more international cooperation, but I'm not sure on how many aspects. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to hand it over to a lawyer who might be able to provide a more detailed answer to this.
Nathan or Veronica, would one of you like to give your point of view on this?
Yeah. Actually, I was thinking that Vittorio just showed that there are perspective points of view that are not taken into consideration from other stakeholders. For example, I could never have imagined that there are some issue that relates that concern directly the private sector. They are working on in a coalition in this sense. And I think that also the multi-stakeholder approach really apply to this. And I first mentioned the high-level group on regulation digital markets that is being embraced or included within the Digital Markets Act. That group is an advisory group. It's not it's not like doesn't concern co-regulation in that sense, but it's an advisory group that has certain tasks to advise the Commission in some area falling within the scope of the Digital Markets Act. And this is a step forward, in my opinion. It's not like including the multi-stakeholder approach in the lawmaking process, but, you know, we are stepping up, or we should at least.
Maybe a question for Nathan. I know you mentioned the European and the Japanese examples as regulations in this digital space. Are there any countries like emerging economies which are doing, in your mind, a good job at regulating the digital economies?
Elliott, Can you repeat your question? I didn't get it.
Can you, in your mind, what are some of the best emerging economies dealing with digital competition? Like, are there any countries that are doing a good job at passing this from the emerging economies?
Mm-hmm. Okay. As I told in the according the competitive practice, we have the main problem everywhere. Even if in Africa we have the same problem. You know that in Africa, digital markets are not so developed. So we use European and Occidental, Chinese, American platforms. We still use it more than our own platform. So it's still the same problem. The local company have the same problem because they are not powerful to fight or to have a good concurrence against these big companies. And if we take the case of companies, big companies still try to buy the small ones, that is a problem. And we can take another case where big digital companies create regulations to make the small one have a good business online. So if we take the problem of marketplace, it's the same problem. On marketplace, the big companies are very good visibility than small ones. If you don't have money, if you are on the same marketplace, your visibility is very, very, very small. We don't see you. We only see companies who have big capacity to pay for publicities, to pay for spaces and other things. That is the same. So online or offline, the problem is still here. So we have to adapt the rules and policies offline in online. And I think that the internet must be a solution to resolve this kind of anti-competitive issues, practice. It's now to redistribute, to equalize all things. I think that this kind of event, IGF, we have to create these stakeholders, multi-stakeholders platform to hear and to consider what small companies have as problem. So that is my point of view according this. In Africa, it's the same, but the small company are very problem than small company in European and China, because we use a lot of digital business come from Occidental area.
Elnur, take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Even though I am the rapporteur of this session and my job is to write down things, but this discussion made me think more about the things that's raised by the speakers and also the audience. And I want to ask actually Veronica, because I feel she's closer to the European Union perspective, because from the discussions, I understood that it may be the case that the Digital Markets Act, or for example, another regulations in the other parts of the world, they are not really reflecting the viewpoint of the small and medium-sized companies, as the audience also raised this concern. And is it possible, for example, to challenge these regulations after they are adopted? For example, in the European Union, has there been any cases at the level of European Court of Justice or by the small and medium-sized companies to challenge the regulation itself, even though they are not involved in the, let's say, the drafting process? Maybe they can enforce their rights, or maybe they can lobby against these regulations in other institutions like the courts. Is it possible, at least, even if there is no case, is it possible to do that? Or do you see any hopes? Thank you.
Can I answer to that?
Sure.
Yes, the Digital Market Act actually foresees the revising process of especially of the self-executing, there is a list or like kind of blacklists of activity that should be self-executing. And it's specifically foreseen a process to update that list. I'm not sure that I answered your question because you were talking about challenging the regulation, but I think that the European Commission was thinking to make the DMA regulation as flexible as possible, because we acknowledge the fact that digital markets are, you are fast evolving markets. So it's not possible to foresee now in this moment in 2020, 2021, 2022, all the hypotheses. So yes, they are, you are considering to implement to adapt the DMA over time.
Nathan, please go ahead.
Okay, I want to add something about the Elnur question. I know that if small business and want to challenge big ones, they have to denounce all anti-corruption, anti-competitive practice. One, to denounce, already denounced. And I see that if they want this war, because it's a war, it's a war. If small business want warn this war, they have to create a own federation, like society civil society governments, and fight against these practices. So if they put themselves in the group, if they create associations to fight, I would think that the problem will have a solution, because if everyone want to fight alone, it's gonna be good. It's gonna be a big problem. The fight will be lost. I don't know if you understand. Thank you.
I think that's a great addition, and I think if there are no further comments from either the speakers or the public, I think it's a great point to take a look at the key takeaways that we had during the session. So first of all, my final question will be, are there any final points that people would like to bring forward? And I think then I can go to the key takeaways that we noticed during the session. And there are basically 6 points of which we think became very clear, and that are points where we should take further action on, and maybe, who knows, for a session for next year to find solutions for issues that we have identified during the session. And the first point is that it is not easy to come up with the best model for the regulation of digital markets. Governments may consider alternatives like constant monitoring and assessment of digital markets instead of quick regulation with hard law. So you really notice that hard law is not the way to go in all cases, and that the pieces of monitoring, also more multi-stakeholder consultations and points like that are actually much more effective to create regulations, maybe in the form of soft law, and to kind of take action whenever it's necessary instead of going through a full regulatory process. And the second point is, in addition to emerging regulations, the government should not ignore the fact that local entrepreneurs are not often at the same level as big tech companies to comply with those regulations. That's why the government should not always rush in the regulation. And I think this was very well illustrated with our basically guest speaker, to say, from the public, who represented the point of view from the private sector, and especially as being a small and medium-sized enterprise, that it's very difficult to compete with big tech companies when it comes to having influence on emerging regulations. And I think that is something that we might have to set up a session for next year, because I think that's a very interesting and specific point of view that we should definitely pay more attention to as well, because that's often overlooked. So I think it's great it was identified during the session. And then in the third point of view, which also very strongly links together with the second one, is that in terms of the regulations in the field of mergers and acquisitions, for example, the criteria to call a certain acquisition anti-competitive are not sufficiently effective to predict long-term impacts. And the criteria must be developed to be able to consider future impacts of the regulations as well. And there we notice that it's very much a focus on what's happening right now and maybe what's happening in the next few months. But as we see a lot, digital markets transform much faster than like our regular normal markets, which the regulators have been used to for years. So I think it's an incredibly important point of view to also take a look at the further future, and also to keep in mind that these developments in the digital markets take place much faster and much more unexpectedly than it does in our real life market, to say like that. And I think Veronica very well pointed that out during her first speech as well. And the fourth point is, despite the drawbacks of the multi-stakeholder approach, especially budget concerns, this approach is not only working well in practice, but also implemented in the practice of Latin American countries and India to produce better regulations for emerging digital markets. And I think we heard that very well from both Paola and Raashi, who gave great examples of how the multi-stakeholder approach was very useful in the case of making regulations in those countries, and where they very actively try to find a point of view from different stakeholders in a way that it could be could have like a proper impact on the regulation. So I think that's a very good example, and that those two countries definitely set an example for other countries as well, and I think especially for the European Union. And coming from the example of the European Union, the multi-stakeholder approach must be improved to be more inclusive with the participation of the academia. And I think we saw it very well from Veronica, who is a speaker from academia, who had great ideas, that those voices definitely need to be heard as well when we take into account the multi-stakeholder approach. So I think there we come up with the point that not only we need to look more at small, medium-sized enterprises, but also at academia and the research that's taking place there, in order to have a full and very effective multi-stakeholder approach, where we can also better look at the future impacts and the impacts for smaller companies. And then the last point, which is very important, is that there seems to be different approaches to the multi-stakeholder approach, both when you compare Latin American countries and India on one side, where it's generally positive and very impactful, and the EU on the other side, which is accompanied accompanied by legislative concerns, as we also saw in the interventions by our speakers and from the public. And the multi-stakeholder approach may sometimes result in compromising the small, medium-sized companies, even though the private sector is represented by big tech companies. So this is a point that we have seen a few times during this session, and that I also pointed out a few times during the discussion of the key takeaways, that there is very much a need to have more of a focus on small and medium-sized enterprise, because the private company is not only Apple and Facebook and Microsoft and all those companies, but also the small companies who come up with great solutions and great ideas who we should definitely listen to. And I think maybe an idea for next year is to, on one hand, look how can regulations be more future-proof, and on the other hand, also look at how can we involve, for example, academia, but also small and medium enterprises better in the multi-stakeholder model, and maybe how can we improve the multi-stakeholder model further. And I think that's a great point of discussion for after this session and hopefully at the IGF next year. So with 5 minutes to spare, I would say thank you so much. And I would very much like to hear if there are any concluding remarks from the speakers or from the audience. And I wish you all a great IGF and a great day.
I just wanted to thank you, since we have a few minutes left. I want to thank you, Daphne, Elliott, and Elnur, for organizing this session, pointing out that this has been organized by one of the youth with the youth initiative. So it's very well welcome this opportunity to speak up in this platform. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk.
Thank you to Elnur to inviting me at this session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Daphne. Thank you, Elliott. After this session, I will launch the new version of my website in this room. I invited some friend here. So if we end with this session, my company is a digital agency in Burkina Faso, called it DigiClink, and we are going to launch a new version of website here in IGF. It's an honor for me. So I will launch it in a few minutes.
That's great. Congratulations on that launch. And I also very much want to thank our wonderful speakers, Paola, who unfortunately is not with us anymore, but also Veronica and Nathan and Raashi for their great contributions. And also thank you, Elliott and Elnur, for co-organizing this and helping in such a great way and coming up with all the solutions. I had an absolute blast. I really enjoyed it, and it gave me a lot to think about again. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. I really enjoyed and hope everyone has a good idea.
Thank you, Raashi. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.